Welcome, everyone. So happy that you're joining us this morning or this afternoon, wherever, or even this evening, I guess, depending upon wherever you are around the globe. I did post a question in the chat for you to think about. We'll talk about that, probably midway through the presentation. But I'm asking you all to think about, what could change in your organizations to create more of a culture of belonging. So, top of the news has been the Great Resignation. If, every news feed, every newspaper, every headline has been talking about this phenomenon. And while it's upon us, it didn't just happen. It's been a confluence of a number of factors over time. Trends have changed, demographic trends have changed, immigration trends have changed, retirement trends have changed. Of course, COVID impacted things as well. So there have been a number of factors that have resulted in this Great Resignation. But one of the most key factors is this idea that employees are really looking to find themselves in a position where they have purpose, that they feel valued, that they feel they have a future. And so that is what we're going to talk about today. They really want leadership to take an interest in them, and this is now squarely in leadership's warehouse to create a culture of belonging for their employees to enhance the reputation and value of their organization. So these are our learning objectives for today. We're going to talk about what do we mean by a culture of belonging. We're going to look at a roadmap to create a culture of belonging. Then we're going to look at a 5P framework from the book, and then dive into more information on designing conditions for success. And then, taking away a little bit of the value impact of all of this and how this really does drive organizational value. So to kick it off, let's talk a little bit about culture of belonging. Employees really want to feel heard, valued, and appreciated. They want to know that they can bring their authentic selves to their workplace. They want to have opportunities and a career path. They really want to believe in their leadership team. They want to feel as if what the organization is striving for aligns with their own values, and that the strategic direction of the organization long term is where they want to be and the type of organization that they want to participate in. We've talked a lot about over the years the multi-generational workforce. And yes, we still have a multi-generational workforce, but as of now, millennials make up the majority of the workforce. And their requirements around these issues are significantly different. So organizations need to pause and reconsider, are they really creating a culture of belonging? Because if not, the majority of the workforce may not be staying with their organization. So what do I mean by, belonging versus this idea of inclusion? We often talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it's important to understand that inclusion is based on the idea of someone joining you in doing what you are doing. Belonging is creating a structure that really welcomes everyone to contribute. So inclusion is based on this idea of a dominant culture, and that employees will assimilate into the dominant culture. So to succeed, they have to change who they are or what they value to align with what is valued by the leadership team, what is, historically the norms of the organization. That's often how inclusion is defined. Belonging really requires creating an equitable culture. It goes deep into changing attitudes, beliefs, values, even, artwork and artifacts that you hang around the office. Changing what is acceptable in terms of actions and behaviors. and redesigning all of that so that everyone feels that they are valued and welcome, and that work structures, work requirements are designed to ensure that they succeed and excel. And this work takes place internally, definitely, but it also takes place externally. So embedding belonging requires both views, both internal and external views. Internally, the daily lives of employees must be aligned with this vision of belonging. If you have the vision at the board level and it's not embedded all the way down to the employee level, there is a lack of authenticity. And employees will feel that they were told one story when they were joining your organization, and they're living, a different story on a daily basis. So that requires deep work. And in the project management field, we know that change requires deep work. So it involves, redesigning your programs, policies, procedures. And, it's crucial that as you're doing this, you're also creating a feedback loop to hear from your employees how successful these changes are, and if they're getting what they need to really feel and act in accordance with this concept of belonging. But you also have to look the other way, into the broader ecosystem of community, competitors, partners, regulators, and so on. It's crucial that your organization is representing belonging in that ecosystem and, acting in accordance with its value statement and with its vision, and potentially being a leader for some of those groups, and demonstrating how they too can get on board with this concept to better align your organization's values with, let's say, community values. How do you want to be perceived in your community? How do you want your community to talk about your organization? Will they be ambassadors or detractors based on the type of culture that you're creating within the organization? So when I look at this with clients, I like to use this diversity, equity, and inclusion maturity continuum, and I kind of call it the JDI Journey, which is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. I do use inclusion in this, even though I prefer the term belonging, because JDI is a term that is used in this work, and I thought it was catchy, JDI Journey. Although, don't tell Lucasfilms, I guess they don't like when you use Jedi. But this is important because each organization is somewhere on this continuum. And just like with other, change transformations, it's important to understand where you are, because each of these stages has areas of focus, key players that are involved, unique actions that need to happen, and different outcomes and different desired outcomes. It's crucial to the transformation process to understand where you are on the continuum so that you can select programs and projects or pilots even that can be effectively undertaken by your organization so that your organization has capacity to begin the process and can go along the journey to transform. So often we see that leaders want instantaneous change. For example, they realize that their diversity representation is not very good, especially maybe not very good at senior levels. And they want to rush out and recruit people that will improve their diversity representation. It's some people are going to historically Black colleges and universities. Others are creating job descriptions, that promote more diverse representation in special categories like Chief Diversity Officer. But the issue becomes that if you are just at the compliance or awareness level in this continuum, you're trying to bring people into an organization that has absolutely no structures to give them the voice perhaps that they need, to demonstrate to them that they can have an effective career. So it's kind of understanding where you are and doing the initial internal work to really decide, how are decisions made? What do we value here? How will we bring people into our organization, but how will we retain them in our organization, because we really value diversity of identity, thought, and experience. So it's important to know where you are and to not just try to quickly solve problems, because it's a deeper issue and it has to be addressed as a deeper issue to be effective. So when you're thinking about defining a culture of belonging, think about what it means to your organization and think about your current state. When you're trying to define your current culture, think about, talk to diverse voices in your organization, diversity at levels, diversity of identity, diversity of experience. Get feedback on what your current culture is like. And then also engage diverse voices in what is possible. What should our culture be like? And we'll take a little deeper dive into this concept as we talk more about appreciative inquiry. But then start the process of identifying both short and longer term goals so that you can have some quick wins, so that you can make some impact and demonstrate both to leadership and to your employees and external stakeholders that you are really driving change and that you are committed to driving this change. So one of the things that we have in the book is a cultural assessment, and it considers factors such as mission, value pillars, your environmental, social, and governance commitments, your internal and external stakeholder views of the organization, as well as your engagement activities with stakeholders. It looks at some of your activities and programs, your internal policies, your processes and procedures, how you develop leadership. And, it takes a deep dive into asking questions around these areas, because to really understand where you are, you need to do a deep assessment and understand how things happen within your organization. It's also important to understand how your organization compares to its community in terms of representation data. It's an important first step. Beyond understanding the aggregate numbers, it's also important to understand on a segmented basis in terms of level and function what your diversity representation is. And as project managers, we know that we need an executive sponsor to really get a project to have the success that we'd like it to have. It needs the visibility, it needs the resource dedication of a senior sponsor to move ahead effectively. So board and senior leadership buy-in is crucial for building a culture of belonging. While it isn't a panacea to have it, it's required to start the process and to really align it within the organization. And then understanding your organization's structures, networks, capacity for change is crucial as you develop your program. The JDI continuum that I shared, part of the reason for that is to better understand, where you are and how quickly and agilely you can move to transform your culture, to make it more of one that aligns with this concept of belonging. So this is a roadmap that I use, and it really starts with some key steps in the process of designing, a roadmap for belonging. So engaging with internal and external stakeholders is really crucial to the process. Hearing voices, hearing a variety of voices to gain perspective. Using tools like appreciative inquiry helps to identify what we would like our organization to represent both internally and externally, and how we show up to support issues around environmental and social justice. We look at building capacity across the organization. And as I said, it begins with leadership and really drills into what leadership competencies are we developing and rewarding so that we are creating an environment that supports and values, diversity of identity, diversity of thought, and diversity of experience. So meaningful change requires a real reevaluation of the systems, such as the decision-making process, recruitment, development, rewards, and succession planning. And once we establish goals, we really need to set meaningful metrics to measure impact. Obviously benchmarking is important, but deciding where you want to take your organization requires setting meaningful goals that you can hold everyone across the organization accountable for. So I want to take a little deeper dive into some tools that I use to help design for conditions for success. And the first is appreciative inquiry. It's an organizational change model focused on modeling success and what is working in our organization or in other organizations. It differs from our normal change management approach, which is a deficit-based approach. So often we ask, what's wrong? What do we need to fix? What isn't working? And this is an opposite view, and it takes a view of, when did we create an environment where we were successful? Under what conditions did our employees feel that they belonged? Who on our management team is doing this well? How can we replicate that? Or what other conditions do we need to replicate that? And the other tool that I use is something called people-centered design, which leverages a combination of appreciative inquiry and human-centered design to create solutions for conditions for success. So let me explain what I mean by that a little bit more. So the appreciative inquiry model was developed by David Cooper Ryder through his research at Case Western Reserve. And rather than focusing on the problem, this approach focuses on what's working and leveraging that success. For example, ask employees to imagine building an organization and community in which they would like to live and work. The approach is collaborative. And this is where the question comes in for all of you. What conditions have you seen or would you like to see in your workplace to support a culture of belonging? If you had the opportunity to imagine building an organization and community that you would like to live and work, what would you say you would like to do? What would you like to see happen? Ideas that have come up when I've asked this question in the past are things around time for self-directed work, to allow people to innovate or work on ideas that they think might be impactful in their organization. Ideas around sabbaticals, to take some time off to explore different parts of the world, different ideas, different concepts. Something even as basic as wellness programs, or, flexible work used to be a really big one. We all now have remote and flexible and hybrid. But, we'll see what happens long term with all of that. But these are all things that people think about in terms of what could make their workplaces more supportive of a culture of belonging. Things like paternity leave, in addition to maternity leave. These are all different, different things that come up. So, taking a little deeper dive into this idea of people-centered design, this process begins with visioning and sharing of, we'll call them dreams, ideas of what is really possible. And dreams can be, organizational level, like what do we want the organization to be known for in its community, or it can be team-based. What do we want our team culture to reflect? And once the group has brainstormed and shared ideas, we begin the process of agreeing on something that we want to design around. So a wish that we want to design around. And I like to use a process for voting that allows everyone in the group to share their perspective rather than allowing the strongest voice in the room to dominate the decision-making process. So we often use Post-it notes, and we have participants place, 2 marks on their preferred choices so that everyone has a chance to express what they view as, the best solution to the, I guess the best option, not solution, the best option for creating these conditions of success. And then once the idea that you're designing for to create a condition for success is agreed upon, then we can, brainstorm around delivering a pilot or a program. And again, when this process is undertaken, I find it a best practice to use this individual voting mechanism again to ensure that all voices are heard. And then that allows you to, come up with ideas for either communication plans or actual pilot that you're rolling out, all different things. So these are some tools to use that actually promote belonging as part of the design and solution creation process to develop conditions for success. Another framework from the book is the 5P framework, and this is actually highlighted in the book in designing for designing a culture of belonging for people with disabilities. And the 5P framework is people, so knowing your stakeholders, making sure you have leadership support, understanding who will be your ambassadors and who will be your blockers. Programs, what kind of programs are you seeking to develop? Foundational, transformation programs? Are you thinking about trainings? Are you thinking about bringing in speakers? Do you have an idea of how you want to revise your communication within your organization? Is this more of a storytelling approach? You bringing in subject matter experts? What do you want to put together as part of your program? And then you really do need to look at your policies and practices. So many of us have employee handbooks with things in them that are really based on dominant culture. And they really reinforce dress codes and hairstyles or, all kinds of crazy things. Most people haven't even read their employee handbook in years, but there's a lot in there that really reinforces dominant culture. And we need to really reevaluate whether all of that is necessary and how that can be changed to make people feel that they can bring their true selves to work and come as they need to come. And then as we were talking about the process for designing, I like to use the appreciative inquiry approach. I like to use the people-centered design approach to imagine what is possible, and then inviting, a wide variety of diverse voices into creating what is possible. It's not just a people strategy initiative. This is something that really needs to be embedded across the organization, and people across the organization need to be engaged in this project. And then partners. Who can we partner with? In addition to internal partners, there are a whole host of external partners that can help in this process, that have frameworks and tools that can help organizations create a culture of belonging. So I was going to start at the top, which is usually the board. And, it's important that belonging includes seeing people at the most senior levels with which you can identify. People need to be able to see themselves in roles. So doing a board gap analysis helps understand from a board perspective what levels of diversity do you need to build in. And the perspective factors are on the right, things like abilities, age, appearance, country of origin, and so on. It's not one-dimensional, it's multi-dimensional, and it's really intersectional as well, because, people may be in a multitude of categories. And it's, also reflective, as I said before, of your community representation, of your ecosystem representation, understanding where you are today and what you would like the desired board composition to be, and then creating a plan to get there. One of the mistakes that's often made is people, add one person to their board and say, okay, we now have board diversity. In a way, that's almost worse, because you're putting so much pressure on that individual to represent whatever identity you've laid upon them, and it becomes overwhelming. So this process really needs to be holistic in the thought of, how do we have meaningful representation, and what is representation from an intersectional point of view, so that people can bring multiple perspectives to bear on organizational strategy. So kind of next down is leadership. And a crucial element in this process is creating leaders that have competencies to promote belonging. This is a model that I created. I call it impact leaders. And they require skill sets that are people focused, that, I'm a firm believer that people are an organization's greatest assets. So our leaders need to develop the competencies and skills to be people-centric. Also, they need to be role models. They need to exhibit the desired behaviors. I mean, it's almost shocking in this day and age to still hear of the number of, sexual harassment suits, things that are going on. Leaders need to be role models. They need to follow the organizational rules, and they need to behave and act in accordance with what we've agreed to as an organization. On the other side, it also includes things like taking time off. If your manager isn't taking maternity leave or isn't taking vacation, it's very hard for the people that work for that manager to do so. So they need to model work-life balance. They also need to act as a mentor and an ally, demonstrating that and exemplifying that type of role model behavior as well. Being a visionary, leveraging, concepts like design thinking to innovate people strategies that promote belonging. And then as an implementer, taking new approaches like the appreciative inquiry approach to drive meaningful change and transformation and be an effective communicator and support their teams and projects, not just saying get it done, but really being an advocate for this kind of change. And then drilling down into the organization, thinking about culture, we really need to change, what are our cultural norms? How is business conducted here? How do things get done? Who makes decisions? Who gets promoted? Policies and processes all need to be revised. So, starting with the left, ensuring that you have the board and C-suite support and that this is on their agenda. Making sure that you have the norms codified and expressed to everyone in the organization. Making sure that managers have tools and training to really become the types of leaders that we were just highlighting. And redefining, where necessary, work and team norms. Making sure that you are aligning compensation with these objectives that you're laying out for a culture of belonging. If you align, if you're not rewarding this kind of behavior, if you're rewarding another kind of behavior, that's the kind of behavior you'll get. And then focusing on data and leveraging data as a way to drive decision making. So much of decision making is still based on intuition rather than data. So as we look at redesigning some of these systems, one of the big ones is the talent ecosystem. So starting at the top, acquire, where are you looking for talent? How are you evaluating talent as they come in? What is your interview process? How is it structured? Are you doing team interviews where really one loud voice on that team is dominating the decision-making process? Are you using standardized questions for all people coming in, or are you allowing your managers to ask ad hoc questions? There's a lot that can be done to make your talent ecosystem more equitable and fair. And then when we move into motivation, how is performance measured? Is it based on intuition or is it based on goals that are measured? How is feedback provided? What feedback is provided? Are you just doing annual reviews or do you have, weekly check-ins with your people? And then how are opportunities shared? Who gets the great projects? How are names fed to get, these new opportunities? And then with growth, how are you developing your people? What kind of programs do you have? What kind of, opportunities are you allowing them to take on? Are you training your people to be future ready, or are you just hoping to buy kind of new collar or gray collar talent in the marketplace? So, how strategic are you being around developing your people for the skills that they will need going forward? And then with mobility, are there pathways to move across and around the organization? Are operations siloed? Are managers holding back their best people because they don't want to lose them? Or do you have to be in a certain function or department to advance? Is there really only one pathway to the top? Are you offering things like gig assignments to support skills development? And then contingent workforce. How are you treating your contractors? What requirements do you have for your vendors that are supplying contract labor? How are they taught about your culture and your requirements for creating a culture of belonging? What guidelines are they given around how team meetings should operate and how, how conversations are held within your organization? So a lot to consider, a lot to take a look in. And that's why when we talk about the JDI continuum, each of these areas kind of comes up at different points because it is a lot to drill into and to understand. So let's take a minute and talk about data-driven decision making. To create a culture of belonging, decisions really need to be based on data rather than intuition. Intuition is so subject to bias, especially unconscious bias. And data-driven decision making grounds decisions in tangible metrics, data, and information. And that really improves organizational outcomes as well. I don't have slides in here, but there's been a lot of research to show that organizations that implement true data-driven decision making outperform their peers. So these are some steps, for promoting data-driven decision making. Be clear on what your objectives are, identify the source of data that you're going to use, ensure that you have good data quality, do the data analysis, follow any kind of requirements for disclosure around data. Many countries in the world now have GDPR type restrictions, and there must be, clear paths for people to opt out, or also clear information on what data, especially personal data, is being used for. But it still can be very impactful and very useful. So once you have the data, how are you going to put it in an informative format to share with managers so it impacts their decisions on a regular basis? So it's important that you have quality data, that it's transferred to information, and that it's shared so that when decisions are being made, that managers know what the objectives are and where they stand relative to those objectives. So these are some tools to help promote belonging. As you begin to think about programs, these are some that I use regularly. I started with allyship just because it's so crucial for those people who are in power to use their power and privilege to uplift others. And that's really what allyship is about. ERGs are employee resource groups. They can be very helpful both to the organization and to employees within the organization, depending upon how they're structured and the amount of exposure they have, especially exposure to senior leadership teams. ERGs that have a senior sponsor often feel very empowered to make recommendations. I think a classic case is the Comcast voice remote was created by an ERG that was created for individuals with disabilities. And they came up with this idea to help people who had mobility issues, and it became actually a great product for Comcast across all marketplaces. Mentorship and sponsorship. I think mentorship is more about education and helping someone develop their own skill set. Very important with, how you develop your career, what you need to do. So much of this is now placed on employees, and they really need to have a game plan on how to work the lattice of organizations. But sponsorship is something a little different, and that is, whose name is being recommended when great projects come up, when promotion opportunities come up, even when lateral moves come up that can be really career enhancing. So that's another, way to use your voice to drive belonging. Sharing stories that you've been involved in, encouraging others to share stories. I don't really cover this in this talk, but so much of the work that needs to be done requires all of us to invest our time and energy in becoming more familiar with others' histories, cultures, experiences. And, it's not on them to teach us. It's for us to teach ourselves. But having said that, it's often very impactful if people within your organization want to share their stories and tell their stories across the organization to help people gain perspective. Town hall gatherings are an important sharing time to bring up issues, to share authentically, and to have senior management representation authentically talk about issues. And then, as I mentioned before, partnerships. Building partnerships is really crucial to driving meaningful change. We'll talk a little bit more about that. One in the final chapter of the book, chapter 11, we talk about ideas to create more opportunities for all. And the P-TECH model is featured in a case in there. And this model was created by IBM, and it's a public-private partnership that leverages education and educational institutions, private industry, and government. And it's a redesign of the education process, combining high school and a 2-year associate's degree to train today's youth for well-paying, high-demand, technology-based jobs. The model, is based on the premise that school is not done after high school, and that the whole 6 years is part of the model, so that people are both going to high school and community college kind of simultaneously. And the model offers internships with organizations to put, recent grads on the pathway to life-sustaining earnings. And this helps address some societal access and equity challenges. The careers also, in general, need to have, so that was the P-TECH example. I think in terms of creating opportunities for all, careers in general need to have off-ramps and on-ramps to allow for work-life integration. In addition, organizations can create incubators and innovation hubs. And when they do that, they need to think about how funding is being allocated, and does that structure promote and create a culture of belonging. So as they're trying to innovate, who is getting the money? Who are they supporting? What kinds of businesses are they supporting? And then truly engaging community leaders in conversations around philanthropy and community outreach, so that funding is allocated where it's most needed. Not necessarily where the organization thinks it's most needed, but where those in the community that are living in the community feel that it is most needed. I think that in terms of accountability and reporting, a lot has been written about ESG reporting, the lack of standardization for meaningful comparison. And we really need to promote greater accountability and reporting. As an example, over 65 billion was pledged by organizations in support of BIPOC communities, businesses, and individuals in response to the 2020 uprisings and Black Lives Matter outreach. And a recent report from, investor community indicated that less than 10% of those funds have actually been allocated. So we really do need better ways to measure accountability around environmental and social justice issues. Otherwise, as organizations, we're going to be accused of woke washing, which is kind of saying one thing and then not following through with it. So building partnerships is really important, both from a redesign perspective, but also from an allocation of capital perspective, and getting, the pulse of community and really hearing community voices around what are the true barriers. So what is the impact of this? What is the impact of belonging and creating a culture of belonging? One of the impacts is that you get a much larger pool of qualified talent in the 5P model that's discussed in the book. One of the reasons that the organization undertook this, this approach was, one, it was the right thing to do, but two, they needed more qualified talent in a technology field, and so this was a way to do that. Also, getting access to new markets and opportunities. The world is really looking for representation and for people to look like them when they come into the markets and to understand what's going on in the markets. So it's in a way a license to operate, and you may not get those opportunities to enter a new market if you are just a dominant culture business. Innovation, there's been a lot, and I'll share some stats on innovation, but diversity does drive innovation. And then, all the issues around great resignation issues like employee engagement, retention, sense of purpose, all of those help drive organizations' bottom line. So improved productivity. We didn't get into it a lot here, but more and more investors are asking about these kinds of questions. The SEC is requiring disclosure around human capital management practices. So increasingly, banks, investors, the government wants to know data around how are you creating a culture of belonging. A lot of states require pay equity disclosures. The federal government requires it. So, these things are here to stay, and you can either use them to your advantage or not, but others will be. So just sharing some of the stats that I have, because I think this group always likes to know what are the numbers. These data points are from McKinsey, and they highlight the value creation impact of a more diverse workforce. Creating organizations that value all people is crucial to supporting workforce diversity and to reap the benefits of diversity of identity, experience, and thought. So you can see the last stat there is you get almost a 1% increase in EBITDA by increasing your senior management diversity, which is, significant. I also like to share, this is a model that was created by SAP, and they call it their Business Health Culture Index. And it assesses the degree to which the workplace culture supports people's well-being, work-life balance, and organizational health. And one of the most important measurements in the index is employee engagement. And they target an employee engagement range of like 84 to 86%. And they have found that the Business Health Culture Index measure significantly impacts operating profit, and that a 1% change in the BHCI generates 90 to 100 million euro impact on profits. So if it goes up 1%, that's an additional 100 million. If it goes down 1%, that's losing 100 million. Pretty significant. And then this is what I was mentioning about innovation. And this is the Boston Consulting Group report on how diversity impacts innovation. So, you can see the red and the green. Companies with above average diversity scores have 45% average innovation revenue reported by them, as opposed to, organizations with much less diversity. So clearly, lots and lots of business reasons for this. So these are a few key takeaways. In order to meet global requirements, social, political, environmental, and demographic trends, organizations and their leaders really must create cultures of belonging to attract top talent, maintain their license to operate, enter new markets, retain market share in existing markets, attract investors, meet government compliance, and thrive in the 21st century. Our leaders need a new toolkit for the 21st century because using the 20th century toolkit no longer applies. So with that, I'm going to just let you think about a few questions. I want to share with you, for joining us today, this discount code with the Rutledge.com on the left website. You can get 20% off with the code FLA22 when you check out on my new book. So that's my little thank you to all of you for joining us today and learning more about creating a culture of belonging. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Susan.
Kristina, someone did post bad behavior gets swept under the carpet, and what can be done with this?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Thank you, Lisa. It's, that really goes back to my point as to why leadership needs to be on board, that you cannot accept bad behavior. You have to make the tough decision, even if it's your top salesperson. You've got to make that tough decision that bad behavior will not be tolerated, and set that expectation and carry through with that. Now, there can be steps for training and remediation, but if bad behavior continues, then that person just has got to be let go. I mean, there's just no other way. So we absolutely do require that senior people are on board with this decision, because they ultimately may have to make these decisions. I mean, I've even seen things where, it's a family business and they're family members that are not behaving well. And those are tough conversations, but they have to be, they have to be had, because if you're not going to address inappropriate behavior, then you cannot have a culture of belonging, because everyone knows that people will be able to get away with actions and behaviors that are not aligning with what you're purporting your value system is.
And we thank you so much, Kristina, for joining us today.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you everyone for joining.